Okay, this week is Purim, and also Parshios, and it's very interesting that Purim usually falls out in the period of time when we read either about the construction of the Mishkan, or as it's in this year, the first sedrus of Parshios of Chumash Vayikra, which deals with Korbanos. In terms of the traditional approach, which we see that some had, so we could perhaps assume that there is a connection between Purim and the sedrus that deal with the construction of the Mishkan and that deal with Korbanos. Now, Purim, in addition to reading the Megillah, we also read Vayavo Amalek. That's sort of like an introduction to the battle against Amalek. Haman was from Amalek. Haman Hagagi, actually, there is some question whether Haman himself was from Amalek, because the question was whether Agag was from Amalek. And one of the questions is, why is it that what was Shaul's rationalization not to kill Agag? Now, it seems from Medrashim and actually from the Torah itself that the nations of the world would when they appointed a king, would appoint a king that was not from within their own ranks. Somehow they did not respect somebody that matured or grew within their own ranks. So that's why the Torah tells us about the Jewish people, so it's possible that Agag himself was not from Amalek. A matter of fact, the Mechilta, I think, says Zeicher Amalek, Zeicher Agag. And Amalek, that's Amalek. Why do you need a special pasuk? Agag himself was from Amalek. But in other words, it's possible that Agag himself was not an Amalekite genetically. But because he became king of Amalek, so the halachas that apply to Amalek apply to him. And it's possible that Shaul used that as a rationalization, since it was a mitzvah of wiping out the memory of Amalek. Agag was not an original Amalekite, perhaps. And consequently, he perhaps thought that would be the basis of a heter, or whatever you want to say, not to kill Agag. Of course, halachically, he was considered an Amalekite, both because he was king of Amalek, he was associated with Amalek, and he had the ideology of Amalek. So because of that, he was included in the mitzvah of killing out Amalek. So so Haman was a descendant of Agag, and consequently, the war against Haman, is considered to a certain degree as a war against Amalek. It's the Ravid on the Safra is well known. The Safra says, not that there aren't those that disagree, that one could fulfill the Ravid says, according to Safra, that one could fulfill the mitzvah of Zikaron Amalek by reading either Vayavo Amalek, which the Magen Avram also points out, the Mishnah Berurah disagrees, and then, or Zachar Eis Asher Asa L'cha Amalek, or the psukim in Shmuel, Pakadati es asher asa lecha Amalek. The Pakadati es asher asa Amalek. I remember God says when He commands Shmuel to tell Shaul to destroy Amalek, and also the Ravid says Hilchos Megillas Esther. Hilchos Megillas Esther. My uncle understood it as well as others that it meant learning the halachas regarding Megillas Esther. I think the simple pshat in Hilchos Megillas Esther is Megillas Esther, but if you look at the whole context of Megillas Esther, it all leads up to the laws that one is supposed to observe on Purim. So in its essence, Megillas Esther is to tell us the story of Purim, of course, how Haman, who was from Amalek, tried to destroy the Jewish people, and how we fought against him, how Kadosh Baruch Hu, how we were successful in that battle. In a sense, fulfillment, or a partial fulfillment of that. And leading up to the halachos, but it's called Hilchos Megillas Esther because the whole Megillas Esther builds up to know what the halachos of Purim are. So, a matter of fact, there was a Havamina, not a Havamina, there was some Talmidim that thought that the mitzvah of Megillah at night was to read the Megillah. The mitzvah of Megillah in the day was to learn the Mishnayos of Megillah, the Torah Sheba'al Peh of Megillah. Why would they think to learn the Torah Sheba'al Peh of Megillah? Because since the essence of Megillah reading is to learn the halachas of Purim, so they interpreted that the Chayav Adam, they mistakenly interpreted to mean to learn the text of Torah Sheba'al Peh of the laws of Megillah, because the essence of Megillah is the laws of Purim. Now, so in a sense, the idea of the Milchemes, the war against the war against Haman and the supporters of Haman, that is in a sense, and reading about it, is a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Schiras Amalek. Now, we find that Moshe Rabbeinu, after his encounter with Amalek, after Yehoshua vanquished Amalek, so Moshe Rabbeinu built a mizbeach, an altar, which he called it on Hashem Nisi. God is my miracle. Now, so we see clearly there is some connection between Amalek and Korbanos and the altar and sacrifices. And of course, that could help us in understanding also why there is that could help us understand about why sometimes it comes in conjunction with reading about the Mishkan, or right after, as in this year, shortly after reading about the Mishkan, because the Rambam says that the purpose of the Beis HaMikdash was to have a special place to do the avoda, to bring korbanos. So we have to understand this better. Now, what the connection is between Milchemes Amalek, the war against Amalek, Purim, and the Korbanos and the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. Now, the Rambam at the beginning of Yad HaChazaka, so there he has the Minyan HaMitzvos HaKatzer, where he lists all 613 mitzvos of the Torah. And at the conclusion of the Minyan HaMitzvos HaKatzer, he mentions he talks a little bit about mitzvos to Rabbanan. And when he talks about Purim, he says the significance of Purim is that Purim was a holiday established to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for listening to our tefillos. Now, almost all the miracles had something to do with a response to tefillah. Yet, we don't emphasize the Rambam doesn't emphasize that point in regard to the other miracles. I mean, every time the Jews encountered a tzara, there was a plea to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please help. By Yitzias Mitzrayim, but Tal Shavasam Elokim, and that seems to be where the trend changes. Okay, it's true that some say it wasn't tefillah, it was just crying out. But many say that it's talking about tefillah, of davening. Still, that's not the emphasis of Purim. That about how God listens in general to our tefillahs. It plays a role in Yitzias Mitzrayim. But by Purim, it seems from the Rambam that the focus is the recognition, giving thanks to God for the idea, not just that he answered our prayers then, but that was an example how God is constantly answering our prayers and is close to our prayers, close to our crying out to him. Now we have to understand why it's emphasized by Purim. Now, and the truth of the matter is, the Gemara in Megillah, this idea is expressed in the Gemara Megillah, because the Gemara Megillah, Daf Daled, asks the question, why is it that Megillah is read both night and day? So it says, Chayav Adam Lik. I shouldn't even say ask the question, it makes a statement. Chayav Adam Likros is a Megillah b'layla b'lishnos b'yom, shenemar. So he gives two psukim, and the first pasuk is shenemar el kai ekra yomam v'losana layla v'lodumyali. Oh God, I will call out by day, you did not answer. By night, there is no respite for me. So in a sense, the Megillah is in a re-experiencing of the Jewish people calling out to God before the miracle of Purim took place. So, a matter of fact, many poskim say, the Shulchan Aruch mentions it, that one should not break their fast until after reading the Megillah, because the reading of the Megillah is, in a sense, is re-experiencing the crying out to God. So, Purim is dedicated to this idea of crying out to God. And there's another pasuk that is mentioned that expresses almost the opposite idea. The pasuk says, my soul might sing to you and not be stilled. Hashem, my God, forever will I thank you. In other words, it talks about hollow praise of God and thanking God. It emphasizes not the idea of sorrow, not the idea of trouble, but the idea of happiness, of giving thanks, of singing to God. Now, it's not the real contradiction. So both are true. And it's interesting that the Yom Kippurim, the Mekubalim, now the Mekubalim say that, and I noticed they just published a sefer from my uncle, and on the Megillah. Well, I just got it anyway. then the introduction, Rabbi Genek wrote the introduction. He mentioned that my uncle explained it two ways. I had explained it the same way, but I just saw that it's mentioned in the Sefer here, almost the same explanation. What is the Yom Kippurim? That Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. Now there are no two holidays that are more different than Yom Kippur and Purim. So, but we could understand there are two possible explanations. I mean, there are probably more explanations, but one explanation is because both are a reacceptance of Torah. The Chazal tell us that in Gemara Shabbos, that in the Jewish people, to a certain degree, were forced to accept the Torah. God raised, at least figuratively, the mountain over them and said, "Into Kablos a Torah mutav." If you accept the Torah, good. If not, shanta hek faraschem. So people could claim we were forced to accept the Torah. Gemara says, "Hada kiblu b'mei Achashverosh," but later on they accepted it, completely voluntarily, even psychological voluntarily. So we see that Purim is a holiday dedicated to the reacceptance of Torah, and Yom Kippur is a day of tshuva. What is tshuva? Tshuva is reacceptance of Torah. Rosh Hashanah also is a reacceptance of Torah, and also because my uncle apparently went more in length to it. But the way I always had understood it is because both are days dedicated to tefillah. Yom Kippur, we sit, we daven the whole time. And my uncle said it's a day of avoda because of the Korbanos. I guess I was looking at from a contemporary perspective, and it's a day of tefillah, a day devoted to davening. We're in shul all day, crying out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, asking for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's help. And Purim is a day also, according to the Rambam, that's dedicated to tefillah. It's dedicated to the idea of re-experiencing the crying out, but more so of the giving thanks for God having listened, and listening to our tefillos. But we have to understand why this point is emphasized so much in regard to Purim. That about the listening to our tefillos. Now, I've read many times discussed in the past that when Moshe Rabbeinu, when the first Milchama, the first war against Amalek, with Amalek, I should say, takes place, Moshe appoints Yoshua to lead the Jews in war. Choose for us people, and choose for us people, but say Yilachem ba'Amalek. And Moshe Rabbeinu himself, he goes on top of the mountain and he raises his hands in prayer. And v'haya kasher yarim Moshe yado, when Moshe raised his hands in prayer, v'gavar Yisrael, then the Jewish people had the advantage, the military advantage. But kasher yarim Moshe yado, when Moshe Rabbeinu puts his hands down, so the governor Amalek, so Amalek has the advantage. So Aaron and Hur, they help Moshe keep his hands constantly up in prayer. So every moment he is praying, every moment he is asking for God's help, and every moment the Jewish people are successful in their defense against Amalek. Now, the question is, there are many questions. One is the why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu had to raise his hands in prayer? There's no such halacha that you have to raise your hands in prayer. Why is it that here it was necessary for Moshe Rabbeinu to raise his hands in prayer? And there's a question I once saw in the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel says, he mentions the Gemara in Brachas, well, he makes reference to it, that that mimamakim krasich Hashem, the simple pshat of mimakim, from the depths I crawled out to you, God, means from the depths of my heart. But the Gemara in Bracha says that it's always good to daven in a low place, not in a high place. A matter of fact, because of that, the custom was that the chazan, as opposed to the custom in America, where the chazan, on the contrary, stood on an elevated place, in Europe, where the chazan stood was, on the contrary, lower than the rest of the shul. So from the depths I call you out. So why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Korbanos says, had to go on top of the mountain to daven? Now we have to understand that what was Amalek? Who was Amalek? Why did Amalek attack the Jewish people? After all, the Jewish people did not present a threat to Amalek. Vayavo Amalek. Amalek came from afar. Why did Amalek? But it wasn't just as against the Jewish people, but it was against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Milchama l'Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor. Amalek recognized the Jewish people were B'nai B'chori Yisrael. They are the ones that were going to lead the world to recognition of God, accepting the yoke of heaven, recognizing God as King of the world. And that's something that Amalek didn't want. Ein shmi shalem ve'ein kisi shalem. My name is not complete. Name of God is recognition of God. And Kisei represents the throne of God. My throne is not complete so long as Amalek is in existence in the world. Now, because that's what Amalek was dedicated to the idea of non-recognition of God. Now, the Jewish people, when did Amalek attack the Jewish people? When the Jewish people, Masa Meriva, said, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu imayim. Is God in our midst or isn't God in our midst? So in other words, they began to have doubts whether God was with them, was in their camp or not. And it's interesting that I was told by someone who attends my shir that Rav Nachman, I mentioned this thought, that Rav Nachman Breslov points out that the gematria of Amalek is the same as Safek, is doubt. In other words, the Amalekios, the ideology of Amalek causes the Jewish people to have doubts about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, about HaKadosh Baruch Hu being in their midst, HaKadosh Baruch Hu taking care of their needs, of their special relationship, of their special connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or you could say it's because of their doubts that Amalek comes to attack them. Now in Egypt, the Jewish people sat back. And there was Aseres Hamakos. And then even when at the Yam, the Jewish people played no role. There were some that cried out to God. There were some that rebelled against God. But they didn't. Nachshon ben Aminadav ran into the sea. Okay. But for the most part, the Jewish people sat back and everything was done by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was no ability to say that the Jewish people caused the Aseres Hamakos. There was no ability to say that the Jewish people split the sea. It was clear and it was obvious that everything was done through HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through God. But when it comes to Amalek, to the war against Amalek, here the Jewish people fought the battle themselves. And whenever we're involved there is a tendency to say, Kochi v'otzim yadi yoses achayil hazeh. The Jewish people were presented with a special challenge. Now, why was it? Because the Jewish people, in a sense, began to fail to see the hand of God. Nature, the Mekubalim say, and I mention it all the time, is a curtain that hides God. But it's our responsibility to penetrate the curtain and to see God's presence behind the curtain of nature. And when the Jewish people said, Hayesh Hashem, when we have miracles that are shalom b'derech hateva, that contravene the laws of nature, so then the curtain becomes lighter, or to a certain degree, the curtain is lifted, and the Jewish people recognize that it's God that's doing it. But when these miracles are repeated day after day, and they become part of nature, and the Jew begins to say, Hashyesh Hashem b'kerbenu emayin, that curtain becomes thicker. And it was because that curtain became thicker that bore a certain identification with the philosophy and the ideology of Amalek, of non-recognition of God, that the Jewish people were attacked by Amalek. So the Jewish people, in a sense, had to demonstrate that even where they were involved in the war, even where they defeated Amalek, what they did, one could have interpreted on the basis of nature. Perhaps they could have said, people love to believe that they have the superior army. So they might have interpreted it was a challenge for them to recognize it was the hand of God. Because of that, Moshe Rabbeinu had to, Moshe Rabbeinu had to go on top of the mountain. Moshe Rabbeinu had to go on top of the mountain so the Jewish people should identify their victory, every moment of their victory, with the tefillas, with the prayers of Moshe Rabbeinu. From afar, the Jewish people would not have been able to see the lips of Moshe Rabbeinu moving. So Moshe Rabbeinu went on top of the mountain and raised his hands in prayer, where the Jewish people who are doing battle would see him from afar. And that way they would recognize that not only Kriyas Yamsuf and the Aseres Hamakos and the 10 plagues were done by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but even that which they were doing, they had success only because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because God brought that miracle through their hands. And it's interesting that the Maharal, the first time I heard this was when I was a freshman in high school. My Rabbi was Reb Chaim Siegel's Atzal. Later, he became the principal of the Mesivta Rabbeinu Chaim Berlin. And he mentioned the pshat that why is it, it's a question that many ask, why is it that the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not mentioned in the Megillah? And they said because the whole miracle of Mordechai Esther could it be explained on the basis of Derech HaTeva? Esther's diplomacy, Mordechai's diplomacy. the military might of the Jewish people that overcame their enemies, that overcame the Haman and his followers. So God wasn't a parent. So because of that, God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah. But it is our obligation and it's our challenge, as it was the challenge of the Jewish people at that time, to recognize the hand of God, God's presence behind the curtain of nature, and to recognize that it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who saved them. And that's why, and this we do this with the Al Hanisim, and we do this with Haravas, with the bracha, as Haravas Rivenu has done this in Kurseinu, V'hadanas Dinenu, V'hanokim Nismasenu. And in a sense, we could suggest that that's the connection between the Mishkan, the Mikdash, the Beis Hamikdash, and Milchemes Amalek. Because what brought about Amalek? What brought about Amalek was the Jewish people said, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu umayim. Is God in our midst or not? And the mitzvah of building a Mishkan, the mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash, v'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham. It was to emphasize to the Jews God's presence there. And the Korbanos also. The Korbanos and the name of God, Shmi Shalem, Shimach Hashem Amalek Min Ha'olam. Shmi is recognition of God. When the Jewish people begin to say, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu mayim, it's indicative of the fact that they're not recognizing God. They're not recognizing his presence. They're not recognizing what he's doing. And the whole idea of Korban, what is Korban? Korban comes from the word karev, to come closer to God. The Jewish people, Masa Meriva, they said, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu mayim. In other words, they felt distant from God. Someone that's close, we recognize. So figuratively, when they say, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu mayim, so in a sense, they feel distanced from God. So the idea of Korbanos, the idea of the Mizbeach, is to come closer to God. It gives us the ability to renew that closeness. Korban is kapara, is atonement. When a Jew, why was it necessary to bring a korban? Because sometimes I think when a Jew sins, he feels consciously or unconsciously distanced from God. And feeling that distance sometimes serves as a barrier for him from doing tshuva. The whole word tshuva is return. So in order to give him this feeling, to renew that connection with God, the Torah prescribes the giving of Korbanos, coming karev, coming closer to God. And it's very interesting, the Baal Masorah, who takes the number of psukim in the different sedras, and he identifies it with topics related to the sedra. So in Parshios Vayikra, he says it has Kuf Yud Aleph psukim, 111 psukim. And what does this correspond? It corresponds with the Uel, know God. What does it mean to know God? The Rambam at the beginning of Yad HaChazaka, the first halacha, Yisod HaYisodos Ba'amud HaChochmos, the foundation of all foundations, the pillar of all knowledge, Leida, to know, She'esha Matzu Rishon, that there is one who was first, who Mamsi Kol Nimsa, and he brings into being everything that there is. And everybody asks the question, why does the Rambam say Leida, to know? Why doesn't he say Lahamin, to believe? What does Leida mean? So many explain Leida means that you should know if you're on the level, the proofs of the existence of God. But my uncle said that that's not the real pshat. My uncle said the real pshat is Leida can also mean experience. B'chol drachecha da'ehu, in all your paths, wherever you go, know God. My uncle would say, you see the sun going up? Don't see just the sun going up. See God putting the sun up. When you have food, this is the whole idea of brachas. It's not just that you have food, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you the food. Yes, you toiled, you worked, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you the food. Matter of fact, the person could suggest that as a possible explanation why Bikurim is recognition of the fact that God gave us everything, gave us Eretz Yisrael, gave us the first fruits, and gave us everything. Comes immediately after the Parshios of Schiras Amalek. But so so it's the mitzvah. So it's recognition. You have to experience God. So Leida She'esha Matzu Rishon, we have to experience God as the creator, God who gives the world the ability to continue to exist. And the idea of Korbanos, of coming close to God, which the first two Sedras talk about, that's in a sense of experiencing God, because when one feels distant, one doesn't want to feel God. One is scared to feel God because he knows what he did. So because of that, the Chumash Vayikra, the beginning of Chumash Vayikra, is identified with the idea of experiencing God. The Ukel, know God. And also he says it comes from another word, Siva, 111, Sadik Yud Vav Hey. Command. Why does it say, why is it command? But the idea is there's a difference between Moshe and Melech. I shouldn't even say Melech, it's Malchus. Malchus is acceptance of the rulership. A Moshe or Memshala is ruling. But when we accept the ruling, then it's Malchus. And when we go to God and we give the Korbanos to God, that's an act of acceptance of God. So as the Moshe, when we go to him, rather than just his coming to us, when he comes to us, he could come to us perhaps as Melech. But when we go to him, we accept him not just as Melech, but we accept him as Malchus. We accept his Malchus, his kingship. We accept his kingship. And that was what Amalek, more than anything else, did not want to accept the kingship of God. Ein shmi shalom vein kisi shalom. My king, my kise, my throne is not complete. The throne is the symbol, not just being a melech. David was a melech when Shmuel anointed him, but he became a Moshe only after Shaul passed away. Only after Shaul was killed. He had Malchus only after Shaul was killed. So when we go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to us, he might come to us as Melech. But when we go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're accepting him not just as Melech, but we're accepting him as Malchus. We're accepting his Malchus. So this is the idea. This is the idea of the Korbanos also. Now, Tzav and Siva is command. It represents the idea of submission. When we go to God and it's an act, and we accept his Malchus, that's an act of submission. We submit. How do we appoint God as Melech? When we accept his laws. So the Korbanos is identified with Siva and Tzav, even though the first word of this week's Sedra is Tzav, is command. And it's interesting, Chazal tell us that Tzav is miyadlu doros, now and for all future generations. When it comes to Melech, when it comes to Malchus, we accept them now, and we accept them for future generations. The son of a Melech succeeds the Melech, or should succeed the Melech. So it's now and for generations. And of course, when the idea when there is chesaron kiss, there is a loss of money. In other words, a person he tries to find reasons not to do something. But if he does the mitzvos, if he does the commands as an act of submission to God, rather than for a special reason, so the fact that there's a chesaron kiss won't play a role. The fact that there's a certain loss of money doesn't play a role. Now, this is the idea also why tefillah is so identified with Purim. In other words, on one hand, tefillah shows our connection with God. It shows our dependency on God. It shows how God responds and helps us even in things that we do. Even where the nisim were not so obvious. And the first war against Amalek demonstrated that by Moshe raising his hands in tefillah. And in all matters, that's why Tainus Esther, the significance of Tainus Esther is to understand the concept of Purim, of tefillah, of God taking care of our survival, perpetuating the survival of the Jewish people. And if we succeed, it wasn't kochi b'yotzim yadi us as chayil as that. It's God who enabled us to do it. And even where God is not obviously seen, we recognize our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who saved us from Amalek. And in a sense, in a certain spiritual sense, we could suggest that the tefillahs that we say, besides the fact that we're asking God for help, that in itself is a negation of Amalek. That is the ultimate defeat of Amalek. Because Amalek will sacrifice himself that the world should not recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and especially not recognize the special help that the Jewish people constantly receive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So to us, in a certain way, we could say that the tefillas that we say is part of the battle against Amalek. When Moshe Rabbeinu went on top of the mountain and it was mispalel and prayed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on behalf of Klal Yisrael. So he wasn't only praying that Klal Yisrael, that the Jewish people should defeat Amalek with their weapons, but the prayer itself was part of the defeat of Amalek. And that's what we have to know when we celebrate Purim, that the defeat of Amalek is not just the war. Sure, certainly the tefillas helped the war. But Isaac Zakagdola, Mordechai cried out, he screamed. But the tefillas itself is part of the defeating of Amalek. It doesn't just enable the defeat of Amalek. It's part of the way we fight Amalek. It wasn't Yeshua alone that defeated Amalek. Moshe not only enabled Yeshua to defeat Amalek, but he actually played a role with his tefillos in defeating Amalek. And we have to understand that while we don't know who Amalek is today, or if there is Amalek today, but Amalekios there certainly is today. And we don't always know who are the Amalekim. Who has the ideology of Amalek? There are nations that hide their Amalekios till they see the proper moment when they can come out against the Jewish people. The Jewish people have enemies all over, but they wait for the moment. They wait for a special moment to try to defeat the Jewish people when is the best time to defeat the Jewish people. So we have to know that we defeat Amalek not just with the battle, which we have to do and we should do, but with our tefillas also, that also helps in defeating the ideology of Amalek as well. Okay.
If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. Can you explain again about the loss of money?
Oh, yeah, no, the reason Tzav, he says, why does Tzav mention regard to Korbanos? Because there's loss of money involved, especially with the Ola. They get nothing from it. So that's why command, you have to see it as a command. You're not doing it for any special reason. When you see something as a command, you have to submit. Just submission.
Someone looks as they think that your grandfather's pshat that your uncle mentions in Kol Dodi Dofek is a Pasha pshat that Germany is Amalek.
It's certainly, I don't know that the genetic Amalek, but they certainly had the ideology of Amalek.
Yeah, so in Rabbi's uncle's Sefer Kol Dodi Dofek, he quotes his father Moshe, which is our Moshe's grandfather, saying that besides for genetic Amalek, there's ideological Amalek.
Amalek, yes. And actually, in other shiur, my grandfather quoted Reb Chaim as saying that.
So to what you said at the beginning about Agag may have not been genetic Amalek, but certainly as their king, he certainly was.
Yeah,
Amalek.
for sure. I mentioned that.
Yeah,
I mentioned that. Yeah. But he certainly was ideology of Amalek, but on the basis of ideology of Amalek, that would not have made Haman an Amaleki. It would have made him the ideology of Amalek.
Agag.
But Agag, Haman is an Amaleki genetically because he's the descendant of Agag, and Agag is an Amaleki because he was the king of Amalek.
Is one obligated to spend more than 1/5 of his wealth to bring a korban?
I would assume yes, that he needs kapara.
But isn't that why there's the bird korban and the flower?
That's
korban?
right. There are korbanos that depending on the korban, there were cheaper korbanos, and for the poor, that's.
But if kishayasa tshuva v'yashu mechote and he has to bring a korban, wouldn't it be a mitzvah saseh, and he wouldn't have to spend more than 20%?
Well, you couldn't say that. You couldn't say that that if it costs more than 20% to do tshuva, you don't have to do tshuva. So I would think that this is different. Here, you're trying to remove a stain on your soul. You understand?
Didn't Yaakov create Amalek when he stole the brachos?
I don't know that he created Amalek when he stole the brachas. The Gemara seems to say that Amalek was the son of Timnah, and the Timnah
was a Pelagish of Asa, right?
Yeah, and Timnah, Amalek was a grandson. Amalek was the son of a grandson of Esau. I think that if you're going to attribute it, and the Medrash says that Esau is the one who suggested to Amalek that he should wait for the right time to attack the Jewish people, but his father told him not to attack the Jewish people. On the contrary, to help. So there was a disagreement between his father and his grandfather what to do, but he followed Asa, his grandfather.
Okay, and why is there no halal on Purim?
So Gemara gives many reasons. The reason the Rambam paskins is kriyasa zu hilula, the reading of the Megillah is in place of halal. There are many other reasons. We only say halal on a miracle of Chutz La'aretz. We only another
of Eretz Yisrael, not a Chutz La'aretz.
In Eretz Yisrael, excuse me, of Eretz Yisrael. We only say halal when we're completely free, and they were still servants to Achashverosh. So there are a number of reasons given in the Gemara for it.
Okay, thank you very much. And what did your father paskin about drinking on Purim?
He paskin that you should drink enough to feel tired and to sleep, which is the psak of the Ramah, and that's the psak of the Rambam.
Okay, thank you very much. Everyone have a good week, a good Purim, and Mir Hashem, we'll see you next week, same time, same link.